All right, let's get going. Okay, let's see. Yeah, so let's see where we are. So this week we just got started on week number 5, and we're discussing React.js, right? We introduced React.js as the logical extension next step in having discussed JavaScript the week before, right? We had introduced JavaScript as the programming language of the web, right? That allows us to control the browser, allows us to dynamically write to the screen of the browser. It allows us to refer to the DOM elements in the browser, right? And then pick out if we want to inject content, remove content, manipulate. It allows us to modify the DOM structure, which basically is what the browser uses to render the screen. Yes, and then we also discussed ways to break out or move the entire content from HTML over to JavaScript. Right? We did this, last week, right? In the when we talked about JavaScript and jQuery, and we saw that we were able to move from a monolithic HTML document, right, where we have all the content, right, the left-hand side, the right-hand side, the main content, header, footer, right? And we saw that by moving it over to JavaScript, we were able to now break out pieces of that monolithic HTML document into various JavaScript components, right? Which were basically just functions that calculated the content of each piece, and then higher level functions, would grab these pieces and would concatenate them into a large, big HTML document. Yes, right? And so that introduced, an entirely new set of opportunities, right, of optimizing and improving our development. Right, it allowed us to break out, things that were, tackle large websites or web pages into smaller pieces, right? That so that we could, perhaps give it to different teams to work independently. So that's amazingly important, right? Being able to break out large things into smaller constituents that can then be combined. That's definitely important. Also, by moving it over to JavaScript, all that static HTML, right now, it could live in the functional world where we can dynamically compute that content, right? If we see things that are repeating themselves, like a list of tweets, right, or a list of navigation options and links, we could create loops, right, for loops that can iterate over data, right, and then render that content dynamically. Yes. Right. So we were able to now move into our web pages be data driven, right? We could break out, data that could live in JSON files or even databases or over a network that we can go fetch that data and then dynamically render that, right? So that's an amazing opening up of an opportunity to use all sorts of great best practices and software engineering paradigms and techniques and whatnot. Yes. So then this week we started talking about React.js, which is the kind of like the natural next step that says, oh, well, all that you learned about last week of using JavaScript to break out stuff and whatnot, well, React.js says, okay, well, let's fix some of the idiosyncrasies that we looked at today, that last week, right? It's a great idea, but you were still working with strings, you were still working with the DOM, you were still working with low-level concepts, right, of the directly with the browser's DOM. And React.js says, okay, well, let's take the best of those ideas of breaking out things into separate files, bringing everything to JavaScript, having functional programming, and let's make a whole language, right, based on that idea. Okay, and so we introduced JSX. JSX allows you to seamlessly, right, combine JavaScript and HTML, easily going back and forth between the two worlds. Yes, as opposed to as opposed to looking at it as in, JavaScript is generating an HTML string, okay? Instead of looking at it that, low level thinking is that, oh, no, wait, these things are components, right? These are new tags that can define new tags, right? Instead of using function calls, you can actually treat them as if they were, native HTML content, right? HTML tag, which is pretty cool, right? Now, if you don't like how HTML works, you can redefine it. You can create your own tags, right, to do whatever you want it to be. Okay. So that's what we introduced this week. We also saw that we introduced a new paradigm of the single page application idea of, it's a modern way of thinking about web development, and moving away from the legacy way of thinking of having multiple HTML documents, right, that have hyperlinks and you navigate from one HTML document to another, right? You kind of like what the browser does is that it dumps the old page and then it loads a brand new page. Yes, that's the old way of thinking. In single page applications, which most modern web applications that you see out there, certainly all Google applications, all Facebook applications, right? Twitter, obviously, all modern applications are single page applications, right? Where even if you're navigating around, right, you never actually leave that single page that you first land on. Okay, and then we use JavaScript to load and inject it. Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's what we saw last week, right? We still wanted to have URLs be able to navigate, right? We still wanted that mechanism, right? But while still staying in the same HTML document, right? And so we introduced React Router. React Router allowed us to bring back the navigation just the way it used to work, right? With history, backwards and forwards, right? But without actually leaving the HTML document, okay? That we can combine, map different components to different URLs, right? But without actually leaving the XML. So let's review some of that. Let's review some of what we did last lecture. Okay. So we introduced index.js as the entry point of our React application, right? That these tags now, they look like tags, but really they're functions. Okay? And then it's this function, whatever this function returns. In this case, it returns a div, right, that contains all sorts of other components, right, that they're imported, just like we did in the JavaScript last week. But, right, you can treat these functions that are imported, these functions, you can treat them as tags, right? They can, syntactically, right, they can treat it as tag, which is pretty cool, right? Also, like you were mentioning, right, that we still wanted the navigation, but without leaving the single page, and so we had to implement our own navigation. Right? Remember, we started playing around how to re-implement the navigation because we wanted to stay in the same page, right? But we still wanted to navigate to different screens. So to do that, there's there are a couple of libraries, but this is the more popular one. The React Router and React Router DOM allow you to map different components, right, to different URLs. So you can navigate to Labs, Twitter, Challenge, right, and go to and see different screens. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So let's take a look at what this looks like. If we can restart, we say npm start. Let's see. Let's see. So that should bring it up somewhere here. There we go. Okay. So notice that it's not going to render anything because the route here is slash, right? It's at the top of the root of my path, and nothing is mapped to that, right? I have Labs, Twitter, and Challenge mapped to Labs, Twitter, and Challenge, right? But if I say /labs, right, it loads the Labs component, right? This Labs component, right? If instead I type Twitter, then it loads the Twitter component, right? Or if I type challenge, then it shows the challenge, right? Okay, and notice that the going back and forth, right, with my arrows, the history works just like before, right? Because we are manipulating the URL, right? And that still works, right? The browser still remembers, right? And it maintains a stack of all these URLs, and they are driving when that URL changes, it triggers a re-rendering of these browser routers, and it checks to see if the path matches any of these patterns. Okay, if it matches that pattern, it says, "Oh, I'll if it matches labs, after this is the path." Right? If it matches labs, then I render labs. If it matches Twitter, one or the other. Make sense? Ever see with me? Okay. Now we could say that I want labs to be the default, and say, well, I want labs to be the default, meaning you don't really have to say labs, right? If it's just slash, that's kind of like my home page, right? That's my default screen. That's where I'm going to land. Make sense? Right? But a little more better way of doing it, right, is not to use path at all. You could say index. Index, right, works the same way. It's basically saying, hey, this is my landing page. If it doesn't match, if it doesn't match any pattern, this is where I want to land. If you don't say anything, this is where I want to be, right? Like the index.html, right? That when you go to public, that index.html, right? That is the default landing screen, right? That loads the rest of the stuff. Ever still with me? Right? Okay. Notice that we had created some links here. Oops, I guess I broke that. Let's change that. We had created in nav, we created a couple of links, and now this is slash. Right, so now we should be able to navigate, right? Okay. And we broke it out into a separate component. We broke it out to a separate component, and then in each one of the Twitter and Lab components, right, we included the nav. See that? We included that nav. That's why when I navigate to Twitter, you have the nav at the top, right? And if I go to Labs, same thing. So Labs also has this nav. See that? Everybody good? Another way of doing it, notice that check this out. So this routing mechanism, only it applies to, whether I'm going to show this, that, or the other, only applies to things that are under the route, that are declared as routes. Meaning, I will only display this if the path is the index. If I will only display Twitter if the path is this. Anything that I leave out outside of the routes, if I leave it outside of the routes, it renders always. Maybe. Wait, what? Routes. There we go. Right, so if I go to Twitter, I go to Labs, notice that hello is always there because it's outside of routes, meaning there's always renders. Make sense? Okay. So actually, instead of having put the nav here under Labs and having it put it under Twitter, well, it looks like the navigation, we always want it to be there, right? Why put it under one or the other, right? Instead, we can just remove it from here and remove it from the nav, remove it, right? So navigation goes away. But if we put it in the apps outside of the routes, now the nav will always show. It doesn't matter where you are, right? So now, notice I can now navigate between the two, but without it actually being inside any one component. Make sense? Because it's outside of the routes, it always displays, right? Okay. So anything outside of routes always. This is basically saying what? This is just a whole bunch of if statements, right? If the path is slash, display labs. If it's Twitter, then display Twitter. If it's challenge, then display challenge. That's all it is. Right? It's kind of like a switch statement, like a switch case statement, right? So if this, then render this. If it's that, then render that. If you put something outside of the if statement, it will render always. Right? There's no conditional. Everybody good? Your question? Oh. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. So let's continue. So maybe if I put out here, H1, welcome to web dev, right? It'll always be there at the very, very top, right? And the only thing that is dynamic is what the routes say, based on what this URL says up here, right? What do you show in the routes is based on that slash. Make sense? Pretty good. All right. So let's keep going. So what about here in Twitter? In Twitter, right? We're going to have lots of different screens, right? There's going to be the Explore screen, right? There's the home screen. There's the notification screen, the bookmark screen, the profile screen. There's going to be a lot of those. Yes. Okay. So for instance, under Twitter, perhaps you would have each component under its own directory, maybe Explore, right? And under Explore, you might have index, and you could say const explore. Now you can use the old function, or you can use this new function syntax, right? You can say return, and this would say this is the explore screen. Okay. And then in the Twitter, you can bring in the explore under there. There it is. Maybe let's put this H2. Okay. And then you could have the home screen. So this is maybe home. And let's bring that in here as well. Oops. What I call it? There we go. There's the home screen and all the other screens, right? So let's copy, and maybe the profile screen. So profile. Okay. Let's just create a couple of these. And the reason I want to show you is nested. You can nest the navigation as well, right? So let's show you that. Right, so let's go back to Twitter, and let's bring in the profile. Okay. So while I'm under Twitter, what I like to be able to do is maybe not show all the time all these screens. I only want to show the home screen when perhaps this is Twitter home. Then I like to show the home screen under the Twitter. Yeah. And whenever I see profile, maybe I want to show profile. Yes. Right. I want to be able to navigate. So I want to do the same thing that I was able to do by saying Twitter or labs, right? Not labs, sorry. Or slash. I want to be able to do the same thing. I want those different routes, all those URLs, to drive what I show here, right? And we did that at the top of the application, right? At the very tippy top. Over here, we went to app, and we display these routes. So I want to be able to do the same thing, right? Inside my Twitter, I want to be able to say, well, I want to show all these all at the same time. I want to have routes. I want to say I want this to display at specific when the path matches certain patterns. Okay, right? So let's do that. So to do that, we're going to do the following. We're going to add here /star, meaning I want you to show the Twitter element, or the Twitter element, this Twitter tag here, when it's Twitter followed by anything. it could be nothing. So it could be just Twitter, or Twitter followed by anything else. Make sense? Right? Always show the Twitter. So if I do that, if I go to Twitter, notice that it still shows, yes? But it allows me to then, inside Twitter, it allows me to create my other routes. I could say, let's create a couple of other routes in here. Okay, and create several routes. Let's say that if the path now matches home, right? I want the elements to be home. See that? So now instead of having home always, I only show it when there's home and oops, routes. Need to load that. Load import and also routes. Okay, notice that it's not showing, but if I say home, it shows home screen. See that? Right? So if it's anything else, it doesn't show it, right? But when it matches Twitter/home, then it shows home. Okay, so I want to be able to do the same thing for all the other ones. I want to say that I don't always want to show Explore. I only want to show Explore when this matches Explore. Now, these are nested patterns. Okay, so now it's not showing anything until I say, home, and it shows home. Or say Explore, right? Oops. What? Twitter Explorer. Oh, you know what that might be? That's actually probably matching something in my public directory. There's a Twitter Explorer, so it's getting confused, right? It first checks my public directory. It sees that there's actually a folder called public Twitter/Explore, right, with an index screen in there. So it's trying to load this index, right? So I'm going to remove I'm going to remove its confusion by just breaking my Twitter here. I'm just gonna whatever. Oh, not letting me. Wait, what? Back here. Okay, let's refresh. There it is. Yeah, it was getting confused, right? The same path was matching, a folder inside of my public directory, and it was also matching my router, right? So it says, well, what do I do? And it decided on the public directory since that's an actual physical file that exists, whereas the routing is all logical. Yes, right? Okay, excellent. So this actually works very good, right? Explore. What else do I have? I have profile. It allows me to do that. Now the home, I can do the same thing. I can say that my default is home, right? So that if it's just Twitter, right? If it's just Twitter and I don't say which one, by default it loads the home screen. Make sense? Everybody good? Okay. Okay, so this allows me to start looking at some ideas on how to break this out. I could say that that these routes is actually the center part of the application, right? You have the left-hand side, you have a navigation screen, right? A sidebar, and the right-hand side, you have who to follow, and those don't change, right? As you navigate between the multiple screens, you always have the navigation screen, the navigation sidebar. It's always there, and the who to follow is always there as well, right? The only thing that changes is in the middle. Okay, so meaning this here is kind of like the center, right, of this screen. So let's do that, right? So this would be something like a row, that would have maybe 3 columns. Column on the left side is tiny, and then 3 other columns. So maybe the center one is a little bigger. And then on the, so that's 6 and 2, that's 8 and 4. All right, so that's my center one. So this whole thing, right, could live here. Okay, and then on the left, I could put my navigation, put navigation here. Something like that. Right, I guess that's too big. Okay. And then I can if I go to explore, right, notice that only the center changes. My navigation is always there because it's outside of the routes. See that? All right. These routes here, again, this is like if statements, right? If the path is explore, then render explore. If it's profile, then render profile. If it's outside of the if statement, it's always rendering. Everybody good? Okay. Yeah. So let's okay. So my navigation, that could be its own component, right? So it could be its own component here. Maybe call it. What do we have a navigation? We have this. Oh well, not here. Sorry. In the Twitter, do we have a navigation? No, we don't. So let's create a navigation. Let's say this could be JavaScript. This is maybe navbar. Okay, and in here you have an index. Oops. Oh, it's supposed to be a folder. Sorry. Let's create a folder. Navbar. Or that actually it would be a nav sidebar, not navbar. But anyway, that's fine. Index. And again, this would be const navbar. And this could return a list. Right? This could be a UL, class name, list group, and this could be LI, class name, list group, line item, right? And this could be home, right? You have all these links. Actually, we could use divs instead, div, and these could be hyperlinks. Right, and this could be home with the href, whatever, right? Href. Home, explore, and profile. Okay, and then we could export this, and then inside of the Twitter, we can bring in that nav component here. Oop, nav bar, was it nav bar? Yes, nav bar, that one. Yes. Okay, there we go. So we have the nav bar on the left, and they are hyperlinks. And on the right-hand side, you would have the who to follow, right? So you would have on the left side, you have the who to follow, and you would have inside, you have index. And again, you could either use the this syntax as a function, or if you prefer the old syntax, yeah, we'll just say who to follow. Like that, right? And then index, put on the right-hand side, the last column on the right, you can bring in the who to follow component. All right, so this starts starting to look like an application, right? And the navigation back and forth right? Instead of explore, if you say home or you say slash, you go home, or if you say profile. But it'd be nice if it could use this left-hand side. We have the hyperlinks, right? As you click the hyperlinks, it navigates to and shows different portions of the screen. Yes? Right? So let's do that. Let's convert this into links. Notice that right now they are links, but they're linked to hash. They're not really doing anything. Okay. So let's fix that. Let's go back to navbar. Let's convert these into links, not with the low-level hyperlink A. Instead, let's convert this into link components. They know how to do the rendering and the navigation, and they work with the routing mechanism, not the low-level hyperlinks, anchor links, right? Instead of these are the link components. And where does this go to? This goes to Twitter / just Twitter, right? Like that. This one goes to link. This goes to Twitter / explore, right? And this is link to Twitter / profile. Okay, so now if I see if it works, if I click on home, right? Notice that now I can navigate between the three screens. Make sense, right? Modifying the URL correctly. Yeah, right. Including caching, right? If this explore screen would have videos and images and lots of stuff in here, right? As you go between different screens, all that content is being cached by the browser. So as you quickly go between these, right, it's not actually reloading the whole thing, right? It is quickly swapping out, right, the cache content in memory that the browser has, right? As opposed to if you were literally navigating to a different HTML document, you would be throwing away the old HTML document, replacing it with a brand new, which needs to be re-rendered entirely. And then if you navigate back again, you're going to drop the old content and have to re-render the old one, right? There's very little opportunity to cache, even though browsers are pretty good at caching, right? Especially if you're navigating back and forth, browsers will cache the screens, right? So you can quickly navigate back and forth. But nevertheless, this is much better. Everyone still with me? Okay. So one thing that we'd like to be able to do is maybe highlight where we are. Right. Notice that I don't really know where am I unless I read here it says I'm in the explore screen. Yes. Right. That's the only clue that I have that I'm at that screen. But it'd be nice if I highlight the this left-hand side. See that? How do we do that? It'd be nice if I could query my URL and says, where am I? Am I in the explore? Am I in the profile? Right? Am I at home? Where am I? Okay, and drive the logic based on that URL, right? Not on maybe on you might think, oh well, I could keep track of a variable, and depending on how the variable changes, right, I highlight one thing or another. Yes, right, but that'd be fairly hard. If we could just query the URL and says, where am I? Which URL? If I'm on the profile, I would like to highlight the profile, right? If it's explore, I like to highlight the explore screen. So how do we do that? Well, it turns out that there is actually a way of doing that. Right? And this is going to introduce a new concept in React.js called hooks. Okay, React has a mechanism called hooks, right, that allow you to interact with the infrastructure, right? Interact with the framework, right? And there's all tons of hooks. There's tons of them, right? And you will be writing your own hooks. Right? That if you want to make some feature available to a component, widely available, you can create a hook that provides that feature. Right? For instance, today, what would be nice to be able to do is say, well, I wish there were a hook that would allow me to query that URL. Okay, where am I? What is my location? Where is my current location? Well, there is a hook called use location. Use location, queries the URL, and returns to you what is the current path. Where are you? Okay, and you can just load it. Right, we can import it from React Router. React Router creates it. So there it is. And you can call this function. It is a function, and you can store the content here. Say location. So let's print out. Let's do console log this location and see what it is. So we're gonna inspect and see. If you go to the console, you'll notice that there's a couple of objects that were printed. Right, notice that they're printed in the index. If you open up that object, this is the location object that we are printing. It contains a couple of things. It contains a hash, a key, a unique identifier, a path. Look at that path. It's exactly where we are. See that? See, that's where we are. Plus the search. The search is a query string. So if you do a query string here and say, colon name equal Jose. Okay, the object includes that. See that in the search? It's everything after the the question mark there. See that? And the path. So if I go back to profile, there it is. Notice that it prints out the function, the path name. There it is, Twitter profile. So we could use this location dot path name as part of our logic and decide, ooh, now I know what I should highlight. Which link should I highlight? Let's do that. Okay. So let's grab the path name. And here I'm going to introduce a new syntax in the language, which is pretty cool. It's called a destructor. I'm sure you've learned about constructors in other languages, right? And destructors, maybe you might have played around with it with C++. That's like, it's a destructor. C++ does the opposite of a constructor, right? It's a constructor tells you, hey, I'm being instantiated. There's a good chance for you to set up the object instance. Whereas a destructor tells you, okay, I'm being removed from memory. This is a good time to clean up after yourself. Yes? Okay, so here destructors don't do that. What destructors do is that given an object, a JSON object, it allows you to pick out pieces from that object. Right? So for instance, we know that the location contains path name, search, key. I want to pick out certain things. Okay? So let's do that. Let's pick out the path name. Let's do that. You can say const. Well, certainly I can work with location that path, obviously, path name. I can certainly do that. I can certainly do const path name equal location path name. Certainly I can do that, right? And then I have a local variable, obviously, right? So there it is, your Twitter profile, Twitter/profile. See that, right? We already know the syntax, obviously. Everybody knows about that. But JavaScript introduces version 6 of the language introduces the following syntax. You can rewrite this as follows. You put a curly brackets around it, and you remove that. That is equivalent. You are creating a new variable called path name, which is being destructed from the object location. That makes sense? All right. And this works just the same. So if I refresh, there it is, my path name. Everybody good? And I can pick out different things. Maybe not just my path name. I also want to pick out the query. I can pick out the query too, and print out the path name and the query. I don't have query, right? But if I did, let's say user equal JGA, there it is. Still. Oh, no, it's not called query. It's called a search. It has to be exactly the same name as what's inside the object, right? So you need to know what the object looks like. There it is, right? It prints it out. Everybody good? Right? This syntax of destructors is used everywhere in React.js, right? It's like bread and butter, right? It's used everywhere in React.js. So let's start getting used to that syntax, okay? All right, so what do I do with that path name? What I like to be able to do is that if your path is Twitter profile, then I want to render this one, right? If it's the other one, profile, I want to render the other one. How do I do that? What I want to be able to do is say, well, if it's home, then I want to put here active. I want to dynamically choose that active. See that? Highlight the home. See that? Right? Or if it's explore, I want to put active right here. Right? So I can highlight explore. See that? That's what I want to do. How do I do that? Okay. So what I'm going to be able to do is that these now should be expressions instead of being hard-coded strings. Okay. I want this to be an expression that I can compute. Right. I wanted to have that string list group item, but I like to have a variable here, some variable that it tells me whether this should be active or not. Okay. Right. I want to ask myself, am I active? If it is true, then I want to add active. Otherwise, I don't want to add anything. Yes? So if it's false, if this is false, some expression here that if it's false, I don't want to be active. But if it's true, I do want to be active. See that? All right. So this is an expression. This is a string expression, right? It's a tertiary expression that says evaluate this expression. If it's true, then it evaluates the string active. If it's not, then it evaluates the empty string. Make sense? Okay, so what is this expression? Okay, so I like to be able. One way that we could do this is perhaps we can break out the path name. We can break it out as a into an array, right? We can say cons the parts, right? And let's print this out. Parts. Let's see what that does. Okay, it's an array. Split. I want to split on the slash. I want to split on the slash. So now it gives me an array of the parts of this. See that? So if it's a Twitter profile, then I have empty string, Twitter, and profile. See that? If I'm in the Explore, then the array is hash, Twitter, and Explore. Yes? Right? If it's in the home, then it's just hash and Twitter. Okay. So basically, if the part number 2 is explore, then I want to highlight the explore. Yeah. So let's do that. We can this class name here in the explore. I can make that logic now. I can make this class name, right? Say I want this to be an expression instead, and I'm gonna make this a backtick so that I can inject expressions in there, and I can ask now. I can say the parts sub parts sub 2, right? If this is equal to explore, right? If it's equal to explore, can't spell, right? If it's equal to explore, then I want to add the active string. Otherwise, it's going to be blank. Right. So if I click on Twitter, notice that it highlights. See that? If I click on profile, it doesn't. Right. So now, right, it's based on this string up here. If I'm home, right, it doesn't highlight it. Make sense? See that? Right. So I could do the same thing with also notice that it's a backtick, so I can break this out into multiple lines, so I can read it a little better. Okay. Like that, and I can break out the class name down here as well, and break it out. This is an expression, right? And this would be be an embedded expression that says if parts sub 2, is equal to profile, then this evaluates to active. Otherwise, it evaluates to an empty string. So now I can navigate between profile and explore and then highlight the different links. Make sense? All right. And I don't have anything for home. Not quite sure what you would do. Maybe you would say maybe the rule might be here that if parts, how many? What's the length of these? This is length 3, right? So if you say if parts dot length, maybe if parts dot length is less than 3, then it's home. There we go. Yeah, that's a good expression. Make sense? Everybody still with me? Okay. All right. Awesome. I can still go to labs, right? And here's my Twitter. Labs, Twitter. This brings me. Notice that it brings me to the home as the default, right? Because Twitter links to just /Twitter with nothing after that, and my index is home, right? And that's what the default renders there. Awesome. Probably while I'm in Twitter, I don't want to see any of this, right? So probably I want to put this back into my labs component, right? Because while I'm in Twitter, I don't want to see that link up there. So probably let's go back to the source, right? And maybe remove this welcome and maybe put this nav back into just labs. Because I only want to see nav while I'm in the labs. And maybe here we can add a hyperlink in the navigation bar that has maybe a hyperlink called labs that would allow me to navigate back to labs. Okay, so let's add this and say just labs, right? And this doesn't get highlighted because it's just going to take me out of here. I'm just going to navigate away. No logic here. So this is just class name. Oops. This is just hard-coded class name that I'm going to navigate to labs. So if I click on labs, it just goes back to labs, right? It gets me out of Twitter. Yes, right? And the navigator just brings me back up here. All right. Okay, excellent. So profile, these all work, right? And then lab just kicks me out to labs. And Twitter brings me back to Twitter. All right. All right. Okay. Let's look at some more interesting things. Let's revisit this to-do list. So this to-do list. Let's close all this. Close all tabs. Let's take a look at this to-do here. So here's our to-do. And right now, we have this array of to-dos, right? With the IDs, this should be unique. That we're iterating over these arrays. Right? And maybe let's make them look a little prettier, maybe. So this is maybe class name. This is a list group. And these line items, these are class names. This is list group item. Okay, that looks a little better. What about being able to maybe add new to-dos or remove to-dos? Huh? It'd be nice to be able to manipulate this list. So let's take a look at that. How do we do that? So for instance, one of the things I'd like to be able to have is maybe a button that would like me to add a to-do. Right, and maybe I can style it as button primary. Right? Okay. So how do I do that? How do I click on this and make it do something? Well, these happen to behave very, very similar to the way low-level buttons work in JavaScript, right? Anything you can make it clickable, including ULs, LI, anything is clickable. You just need to associate it with an on-click event handler, and this on-click takes a function, whatever function you give it, it will call that function to handle the click of that button, right? So, for instance, if you have a function up here, add to do, right? Maybe this says alert add to do. We can just give it that function. We can say add to do. Careful not to put the parentheses. Careful, that will put you in an infinite loop. Right? It will call the function. It will reload the component, and the component will call this function again, which will reload the component, which will call this function again, and it's you'll have to kill the page. All right, so careful with adding that. This is just the name of the function. This is saying I want you to call this function later on when it gets clicked. If you put the parentheses there, you're saying I want to call it now. All right, careful. Okay, so if I go here, I click on add to do. Notice that the alert comes up. Everybody good? Okay. Now, one way to not forget to put that parenthesis in there is to do the following. Instead of just putting the name of the function, right, do the following. Do this. All right, the first thing you put in an on-click, just put parentheses, put a function there. And functions are parentheses, arrow, and then the body of the function. Yes? And then in here, do what you normally would do. You just call add to do, like a function. See that? All right, now there's no danger of you inadvertently, getting into an infinite loop. Okay, this just says I am postponing the call of this function to later when you click on this button. I don't want to call this right now. Okay. Okay, so if I click on add to do, there it is. Everybody good? Okay. So what do we want to do in this to do? What we want to be able to do is modify this array somehow. Okay, and then tell the component, hey, the array changed, re-render yourself, basically. Okay. And that's what we're going to do. Now we need to do it safely. The way we're going to do this is that we're going to maintain a state variable. Okay. And we're going to declare the state variable with React. Is that, hey, here's the state variable. And what React is going to say is that if React ever identifies that state has changed, it will force a re-render of the component. All right, so our responsibility is to force the change of the component of the state. Either adding new content, removing content, maybe changing something in that content. Right, that causes a state change, and the component will re-render. Okay, let's do that. So how do we create a new state? So the way we create a state is as follows. First, I'm going to just rename this as a different variable. I'm going to say to-dos. Oh no, not to-dos array. Okay, so now it broke, right? It broke because I renamed that array. Everybody good? I broke it on purpose. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a state variable whose initial state will be this array. Okay? Right? So let's do that. So how do we create a state variable? The way you create a state variable is as follows. You declare the variable. Okay, you say, and use a hook that creates state variables. Right? There's a hook called use state. Right? All hooks start with the keyword use. Right? All hooks start with use. Okay, and then the name of the hook. I want to create a brand new state, and then the parentheses in here as an argument to that hook is the initial state of whatever new variable you're creating. Right. So the new state, the initial state is the to-dos array. And then here you have this square bracket, which is also a destructor. It's a destructor. The curly bracket destructs objects. The square bracket destructs arrays. Right? So what useState returns, it returns an array of 2 elements. Okay, right? Which we are going to bind them into our local variables here, right? And you can call them whatever you want. You can call your variables whatever you want. This returns an array of 2 elements. The first element is the actual state variable. The second element is a modifier that allows us to change the state. Okay, so I'm going to call my variable, I'm going to call it to-dos, because I already have a variable called to-dos, which I'm going to iterate over, which is perfect. Notice that I'm back in business. Right? My to-dos variable now has been declared. Its initial value, its initial state is whatever I gave it. Okay, everybody good? Still with me? The second element in the array that comes from useState, right, is a modifier. It's a function that allows me to modify the state variable. So that it allows me to say, hey, React, I am deliberately modifying this array or this state variable. I'm letting you know that I'm modifying it. And React says, oh, okay, let me go see. Right? If it indeed changed, then React says it's going to force a refresh. Right? It's me telling React, hey, React, I just modified the state. This would be a good time for you to re-render the screen. Right? It's me telling React, hey, the state's changed. At your earliest convenience, please re-render the screen. Right? I cannot deliberately directly manipulate, tell React to change the screen. Right? It has its own rendering engine. Okay, it's like a game, just like a game engine, right? So it's a loop that immediately looks at the state of the world. If there's a changes in the world, then it re-renders whatever it needs to re-render. Yes. Right, so underneath, React does this. Right, it has a loop that makes sure that it's always re-rendering if the state changes. So I'm going to call my function set to-dos. Right, because it looks like a modifier. Right, I'm going to change the to-dos. Okay, so what do we do here? So what do we want to do? What I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a new to-do. I'm going to create in the add to-do, I'm going to create a new to-dos. So what do I want my new to-dos to be? I want it to be a new array that should have what? It should have the old to-dos plus this new to-do that I'm going to add. Yeah. Okay. So it should have to-dos sub 0. It should have to-dos sub 1, right? Plus a new to-do that has a new ID of 234. The text of new to-do, right? And complete false. False. So that's my new array. It has the old to-dos plus this brand new to-do that I'm adding. Everybody okay? Then I can use my set to-dos to update the array with this new to-dos. Make sense? Let's see. So if I click on add to-do, notice that my new to-do was added. See that? The state's changed. I notified React.js, and React says, oh, right, yes, the state did change. It compares the 2 states. It looks at the previous state, it looks at the new state, and it looks at, okay, yeah, it looks like it did change, right? And then it forces a re-rendering. If the state had not actually changed, React.js would have not bothered to re-render the screen. Right? It has optimizations to make sure that it only forces a change if indeed the state did change. Make sense? So it always keeps track of these states. Very good. Okay, so obviously you might say, well, why are you doing, just to do zero? Why don't you use a loop? Right, why don't you use a loop? Maybe initialize an array, iterate over the old to-dos, copy them over one at a time, right? And then append a new to-dos. Yes? Well, the new JavaScript language has thought of that. It is such a common thing to do, right? To copy over arrays from an old array into a new array. That's such a common thing that they created a new syntax for that to-dos called a spreader, right? The spreader operator. This says copy over the content of that old array, however many elements there are, right? I don't want to have to write a for loop that does this, right? Just copy them over. And then comma, and then you can put whatever you want at the end. Everybody good? You're still with me? So let's see. I can say, to do. I can just keep adding to dos, right? Because now it's copying them over, all my old new to dos that I've added, right? And then appending over and over and over. Maybe we can make this a little more interesting and say, I can say $, and I can add here maybe the to-dos.length. Right, so that if I refresh, notice that if I refresh, yes, all my to-dos go away, right? Because there's no way for us to remember anything, right? Only within the current session of the browser. If I refresh the browser, right, all my content goes away. It goes back to its initial state. Yeah, and it'll be like this up until we have a place to store things. Right now we don't have any place to actually remember anything and store it somewhere. Okay. Well, there is local storage, but I don't want to get into that. Instead, we're going to wait until we have the server. Right. So after the midterm, we'll come back to this. Right. We'll add server support, and that's the place where we're going to store stuff. Right. We're going to send it over to the server. Hey, server, you're going to be around longer than me. This, I might get refreshed any minute. Okay. Please store this for me. Yes. We can't do that just yet. All right. So we'll come back to this a little later. All right, everybody still with me? Okay, so now if I say add to do, notice that it's adding the numbers here, right? Okay. All right. Excellent. Let's keep going. The IDs. Notice that I'm always hard coding the ID, which is not a good idea. So this could be this, and ideally this is coming from some database and whatnot. This could be maybe a random number. One way to have a random generator is that you can create a new date object and then ask for date. .get date. .get date returns milliseconds since 1973 or whatever, right? And since the time progresses forward, this number is always ever increasing. Yeah, right. As our world is in entropy. So yeah, so the IDs are always increasing. Excellent. All right, everybody good? All right. Okay. How about being able to remove a to-do? Right. For instance, what we might want to do here is that here I have the line items, right, and maybe I have a button that I want to be able to remove the to-do. Right. I want to say button. Right, and this says delete, right, and this might be class danger, right? This is a button danger. There we go. So if I click on that particular line item, I like to remove, and what I need to be able to do is splice out. I'm gonna splice out the elements, right, and only keep the ones that I have not removed, right? So how do we do that? So if I click on this, I like to call the function remove, const delete to do. Okay. And let's say we pass in the instance of the to-do object that I want to remove. I could pass like the index because I know it's an array, right? But let's make it a little more interesting, and I'll pass actually the object instance of what I'm removing. Right? So notice I can say button. I can say on click my function, my inner function. I'm going to call delete to do. And I'm going to pass t. See that t is the object that was used to render this. Yes. As I am iterating, these are each one of the objects. So each button, each instance remembers what was the object that was used to render this particular line item. Well, that's pretty cool. So I can say delete t. Okay. And so here I can say I can do console log to do. And so if I clear and I click on this, notice that indeed, look at that, ID 234. This one is 14. This one 14. Huh? Oh, okay. No, sorry. It's not get date. It's oh, gets time, is it? Oh, gets time. Sorry. If I click on this, okay, that's the millisecond. There it is. So yeah, so I have access to that specific object that was used to render that line item. See that? What I want to do is create a new array that does not contain this to do, basically, right? Okay, a new array that doesn't have this array. So how do we do that? Okay, we can say const new to dos is what? Grabbing the old to dos, I want to filter out. I only want to keep the to dos that are not this to do, basically, right? Basically, I want to iterate over the old array. And if it's not the to do that I'm deleting, I want to keep it. But if it is the to do that I want to delete, I don't want that one. I'm going to skip over that one. Make sense? Right? So let's do that. Right, so to dos, I can do a filter function. Obviously, I could use that splice, right? I could use that splice if I know the index. But before I use splice, I need to find it, right? I need to iterate over the array, find the index of this to do in the array, and then use that index to splice out the element. Yes? Right, so I'm going to have to iterate anyway. Right? But let's use this new modern way of iterating. I am iterating over the old to dos. And for each to do, right, so for each to do, I'm going to ask myself, is this to do the one I want to remove or not? If it's not, I want to keep it. If it is the one I want to remove, I don't want it. So I'm going to ask myself. So is td, I'm going to say return, td equal to the to do. If it is, I'm going to return. If it is, I don't want it. And if it's not, then I do want it. True. Right, that's how filter works, right? Filter, you have to tell me, do you want it? Yes, 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 no, yes, no, no, yes, 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 right? Right, and basically filter is a subset of the original array minus the ones where you return false. Yes, as you're iterating over each one. And then once I have the new to dos, I can say, set to dos to the new to dos. Okay, this can be rewritten as follows, right? I could, this could be much more terse. It could be just that, right? Right. This returns, if it needs a to do, it returns false or true. Let's see if this works. Okay, looks like I can remove each one. Walk dogs. I can add nowhere, right? So that works. Everybody good? Okay. Okay. How about instead of adding hard-coded name here, I would like to have like an input field where I can type the text of the to do. Right? So I would like to have like an input field here. Maybe here an input this is a form control, right? And I want to be able to type here the actual to do, and then click on add to do. So I need to be able to keep track of the value of whatever I'm typing. I need a state variable, just like we had before. I need to keep track of the title of the to do. So same thing. I'm going to create a title, right? A new state variable called. I'm going to initialize it with an empty string. Actually, no. I'm going to call it. I'm going to initialize it as new to do. By default, the text is new to do. Okay. And this input field, its value is going to be initialized as the title. So notice that it says new to do. See that? It's initialized to the state variable, the title. Yes? Okay. But as I type, notice what happens now. Notice that it's not letting me type it. See that? It's ignoring my typing. And the reason is that it's hard-coded. Its value is entirely determined by the value of that variable. It's no longer me typing. So the only way to change the value of this input field is for me to update that title variable. Okay, so how do we do that? So to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to use an on change. So if I'm trying to type it, I'm going to type it, right? I'm going to handle the event, and inside the event, the target gives me the actual input field, and dot value is the value of the input field as I am typing. So here I can say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to update my title. I'm going to say I'm going to call my set title to this new value, and now my title is changing. I can type in that, right? And now anywhere I have this title, doesn't matter where I put it. Maybe say at the bottom, say. Now wherever I put it, title, right? Notice it's there. So as I type, notice that it's re-rendering that variable anywhere I put it. Right? So I can even style it here. I can say, H3. As I'm typing. So that variable is now global in the component. Right? And if I change it, it forces the component to re-render that portion. Yeah? Yeah. But what I really want to be able to do is that title, I can then now come back to this here, and instead of this saying to do here hard-coded, I can say title. See that? Let's say title. So now if I say add to do, it adds the garbage that I typed in there. See that? I'm gonna say buy milk, walk dogs. You can say pick up kids. Right? Add to do, and adds it. See that? Everybody good? Okay, so there's where we're going, right? We're going to be able to maintain state, right? Obviously, this state we wanted to. Right now, this state is only within the context of this little component. What about if you want to share this state with other components? Maybe they're nested and they want to be able to talk to one another, right? That's what's going to be the topic of next week. How do we maintain state within a component, right? Using these hooks, or look at application-wide components, right? And how components can talk to one another and share data amongst themselves. Okay. All right. Thank you. Have a great weekend.